Growing up, I spent countless hours watching cartoons alongside my endless gaming sessions, but The Simpsons stands out. I can credit that show for shaping my sense of humor, sparking my interest in doing different voices, and even fueling my overall love for animation. But there's one more thing I can probably thank The Simpsons for, and it's my love for driving in video games. And I do mean driving as a broad spectrum, and less so just racing. Of course, there are other games that probably boost this, like racing games, or even stuff like Halo, where driving was a part of the experience but not at all the main focus. But as most are already aware, there was that little stretch where Radical Entertainment made some killer Simpsons-themed driving games. 2001 had the release of The Simpsons Road Rage, a Crazy Taxi clone, and then 2003 saw the release of The Simpsons Hit and Run, a game that was built off of Road Rage but had a lot more inspiration from Grand Theft Auto 3. Hit and Run differed from Road Rage so greatly because the creators of Crazy Taxi, Sega, found Road Rage to be too similar to their Crazy Taxi games. What ended up happening with the lawsuit is unknown, as it was solved behind closed doors, but it was obviously enough for them to turn the page a bit when making the next Simpsons game. Backstory of these games aside, I played the hell out of these, but more so Hit and Run. The game was a bit easier to understand and there was a lot more freedom to it, so I just naturally gravitated to that game more. In the grand scheme of things, the game was really the perfect storm. It was a game that I was able to just run around in. It had characters I was familiar with from TV, and I had school friends that also enjoyed the game, so it also became a bit of a social thing. Fast forward to now, and I still play the game from time to time. But out of all the games I replay, why this one? Why is this something I would pick up over a lot of the other games I would typically say I prefer? There's a lot to those questions, and it will essentially make up the whole reason why I'm making this review. To break it down simply, Hit and Run is a Simpsons game that was inspired by the GTA games, specifically GTA 3. The game emphasizes vehicular gameplay, but unlike Radical's previous Simpsons title, and more in line with GTA, it also lets you explore on foot. So not only can you drive down Evergreen Terrace, but you can also get out of your car and kick the shit out of Ned Flanders. This opens up the exploration quite a bit. There are areas all over Springfield that you can only explore on foot. You can enter some buildings like the Quickie Mart or Moe's Tavern. Being able to go on foot vastly increases the amount of things you can do in the game. Of course, you can cover more ground while in a car, but you're able to see and interact with so much more of the world while on foot. If you're a fan of seasons 1 to 13 of The Simpsons, chances are you'll find a reference to a joke or bit you'll remember. The sheer amount of references to the show is a bit overwhelming in a good way. Whether it's a building, car, outfit, collectible, billboard, or quote.
And people say I'm slow. Wait a minute, that was an insult!
There's probably something in the game that'll have you going, "That's from Season 8, Episode 18!" or something to that effect. With a series as large as The Simpsons, having references like these are awesome to discover, especially while they're all blended into the game in such a natural fashion. It makes it feel like this is actually what Springfield is like, and not some sandbox with a Simpsons coat of paint on it. I guess that wouldn't be awful, as that's kind of what Road Rage feels like at times. But it's nice that the team at Radical Entertainment went above and beyond when making this look and feel as good as it does. And again, this also helps keep the references from feeling forced. The references exist as things that have happened in this world, and the references that don't exist organically, like the vehicles or set pieces, feel placed in a subtle enough manner that they don't get in the way. Despite all this praise and how perfectly they made the world feel like Springfield, there is one thing that many people may not like. The game's world is actually split up into 3 major maps, so unlike GTA, this isn't one large map. But you know what? This works. I'm not saying that this is definitive, but it isn't awful, especially with how the game changes things up. You will revisit each different map at least once, and it's changed up a bit each time. Usually it isn't anything major, but different cars will fill the streets, new paths will open up, and the time of day will completely change, giving the stage a whole new look. An open world may have given you more pathing options while driving around, but they worked with their limitations and ran with them. You can look at each of the maps as a large racetrack, as for the most part, they are just big circles. There's a ton of smaller branching paths and shortcuts that can spice things up. But the really nice thing about having these more dense maps is that with most of these more limited pathways, you get more detailed or special areas that feel more fleshed out than just a city backstreet or alleyway. The actual visual design is pretty good. Of course, with this being a 6th generation game, I'm primarily playing this on the GameCube by the way, there's a good chunk of 3D elements that aren't the most polished, but the overall art design sells things pretty well. But there's one thing that may not have aged the best, even with some exceptions given when the game came out. The character models don't look the greatest. Still better than Gomer over there. But not every character was blessed with the glory of glories that is the third dimension. Lisa in particular looks pretty weird for the named characters, but a lot of the nameless NPCs don't fare much better. To be completely fair to the game devs and their respective art team, the Simpsons are not characters that translate super well into 3D, but they did their job pretty well, in most cases. The sort of uncanny and off-looking models can kind of make some things funnier than they otherwise would be. There are a lot of background gags you can see while in buildings, and the strange 3D models make stuff like Ralph eating paste a bit funnier than it feels like it otherwise should have been. Out of the playable characters, Homer in particular gets a good chuckle out of me. The way Homer turns around and itches himself is full of the exaggerated swagger of a lazy father figure. My guess is it's probably a combination of him being the character they worked on the most during development, and the fact that he's got a rather simple design. Lisa's hair definitely wasn't doing her any favors. With this being a vehicle-based game, the designs of the cars are pretty important, and they did a pretty good job. A lot of these models are probably updated versions from Road Rage, hence the family sedan missing its roof. But they nailed a lot of the stuff back in that game. A good chunk of the cars in Hit and Run are directly inspired by the vehicles that exist in the show. Of course, there's some originals or different takes on cars. For example, look at Lisa's Malibu Stacy convertible. As far as I'm aware, this is a unique design. In the show, there's been a similar toy car a couple of times, but nothing with this exact color scheme. But then there's the stuff that's been taken directly from the show. Moe's Sedan, Comic Book Guy's Kremlin, Barney's Plow King, and Martin's Honor Roller are all cars that have made their appearance in the show. Funnily, Martin is nowhere to be seen in Hit and Run or Road Rage. Bart is seen as the owner of the Honor Roller in both cases. The street cars can also be driven, but for the most part, these vehicles are less detailed. They don't change when taking damage, and the actual drivers are just nameless jobbers who are giving the characters a lift for all the good deeds the Simpsons have done for in Springfield, as Bart so kindly puts it in the tutorial. For the most part, these cars act more as obstacles, but in rare instances, they can be pretty handy if your current car is destroyed, or if you need a taller car to use as some sort of platform. Each level also has its own hidden car. These are usually more wacky vehicles that are just more fun to goof around with, rather than actually try to use for missions and such. The game is split into 7 levels. The first, 4th, and final level all take place in the suburbs of Springfield. Levels 2 and 5 take place in downtown Springfield, and 3 and 6 are set in the harbor area. Each level will have 7 main missions, a single bonus mission, 3 street races, and a single wager race. The main missions will progress the story, while the others are completely optional. So there's a lot to do here aside from exploring the maps. There are benefits to doing some basic exploration, like getting some collectibles and finding coins, but I will go more in depth with that stuff later. Now that the groundwork has been laid out, let's get this out of the way. This game can get very hard, in more than just a clunky because the game is older sort of way. This game actually controls really good, so I can never really blame the difficulty on the controls. The difficulty can almost be put down to 3 things: the crazy driving of the computers, time limits, and the police. The driving of the computers is mostly an issue on following missions, but sometimes the traffic can also be a bit unpredictable at times. The time limits are pretty self-explanatory, but can become more of an issue when combined with the last element I noted: Springfield's lamest. These guys can be such a pain. In the earlier levels, they are less of an issue, but in the later half of the game, there will be multiple cops that will chase you down. The police aren't a consistency either. There's a meter around the map in the bottom right that, when filled up, will cause a hit and run. Hitting pedestrians, other cars, and objects will fill this meter. Once they're chasing you, you'll have to outrun them while the meter slowly begins to cool down. If you aren't in the middle of a mission, this usually isn't a big deal, but in the later missions, time is very precious, and even if you aren't busted, getting forced to take a new path or spinning out due to the police cars can cause you to lose the mission. And if you fail a mission, you have to start from the beginning. The missions aren't too long, but it can really sting if you lose right at the end. Now, the obvious solution would be to simply drive better, avoid sidewalks, take shortcuts, so on and so forth. But there's a lot of times where pedestrians litter the streets, or there are objects that are in the way of shortcuts. Specifically on the suburbs and harbor maps, there are areas where there are pedestrians that walk in the middle of the road. Because these aren't actually roads in the traditional sense, yes, they are parts of the quote-unquote track, but the streets technically end. It's a creative way to extend the visual design beyond just typical roads. But it's in these areas where driving fast is more precious than driving carefully, thereby meaning you will hit people. With how long I've been rambling about this, you would think I don't like the hit and run mechanic. Quite the opposite, actually. It's just that it makes the game a bit harder harder. It doesn't necessarily feel unfair with its difficulty. Maybe a bit frustrating to deal with, but never outright unfair. The mechanic actually fits the game really well, I think. Getting busted is the only way to get any sort of death in the game. Obviously, the police don't murder Bart, but rather if you get caught by the police, meaning they slow you down enough, or you get hit while you're on foot, they will fine you and take 50 coins from you. It's a good balance. You won't necessarily end the mission, but if you get busted, the loss of those coins is enough of a burn to make you feel like you failed to do something. One other element of the game that makes things a bit more difficult comes from those coins. It's not necessarily that difficult to get coins, but you will need some to progress through the game, so you'll need to get some regardless. However, some of these things can get really expensive, and if you want to go for that 100%, getting enough coins can be very tricky. You'll naturally get coins by exploring, destroying wasp cameras, crates, and vending machines, and even by finding multiple gags hidden throughout the maps. But even if you explore every nook and cranny, you'll come up short for those last couple things you need to purchase. There's a couple of different ways to come up with those last bit of coins you'll need. You can exploit the crates and vending machines by not fully breaking them and then reloading an area, or you can activate some cheats and destroy vehicles to collect some coins that way. But doing everything as intended can be tricky. If you want to play by the books, you can compete in wager races. These are races that'll take you all the way around the entire map. Your only opponent is the clock, but lose the race and you lose the money you spent to enter the race. Win and you get the reward amount. This isn't a quick method, but it's really the only non-cheating way to gain money after you've explored everything. Exploring these maps can be pretty fun, and there's a couple more things you can find outside of just coins. There's some stuff that will add up for your completion percent when finishing the level. There are different missions, the 3 street races and the bonus mission. But there are also gags, wasp cameras, and collectible cards. Gags are just little references to the show you can find throughout the levels. Most of these aren't really that of note, but it's just another checkmark to get you to explore. The wasps are a bit more worth it. These things are just hiding around points of interest. Destroying them will give you a lot of coins though, so they are a bit more worth it in the long run, even if 100% isn't the goal. There's a different amount of interactable gags and wasp cameras on each map, but there are always 7 cards per level. These are the only true collectibles in the game. Most are hidden in areas that you'll only be able to access while walking around. They're simply cards featuring images from the show, each with a brief note on its significance to the episode. Collecting them all will unlock a bonus racetrack that you can access from the main menu, and collecting all 49 of them across the game will net you access to the Itchy and Scratchy movie, a short animation with Itchy and Scratchy in the game's 3D style. It's kind of a boring reward to be honest, but getting all 7 of the trading cards is probably the easiest of the completion marks, so it's not too insulting. Getting all of the different outfits and vehicles count towards completion as well. And just like the cards, there's a set amount per level for each. 3 outfits and 5, technically 6, vehicles. The outfits are pretty cut and dry. You can buy these from shops found around indoor areas like the Quickie Mart or Comic Book Guy's shop. These will obviously change up your character's appearance, but some will also change idle animations. They're all references of some sort. Bart probably has the best ones in the form of Hugo, Ninja, and Bartman, but Homer also has some great ones too, especially level 7's Donut costume. The vehicles are where things get a bit more tricky. To get all the vehicles, you have to do a number of different tasks. At the beginning of each level, you are given a default car for the level. This is what makes it technically 6. But the other cars have to be earned or purchased. There will be 3 cars to purchase. The first 2 are more generic cars you would see in missions or other events. These can be bought from Gil. He is found just wandering the map. The third car is from another vendor, but this will change per level. These are cars that have identities tied to the characters that are selling them. For example, in both levels 2 and 5, Homer can be found near the hospital where he's selling cars he's become associated with, those being Mr. Plow and the car built for Homer, respectively. These cars are actually required to progress in the story. The only time the car from a specific person isn't needed is in level 4, where you can buy Willie's tractor. Another car is awarded to the player for completing the bonus mission. These vehicles are also tied to the requester. In level 7, Smithers asks Homer for help gathering some items. Complete the mission and then you can use Mr. Burns' limo. The bonus missions never have the same style of missions, so they can be a bit refreshing to stumble upon them. Level 4's mission with Comic Book Guy actually reminded me there was a point where Skinner's mother dated Comic Book Guy in the show. The last of the cards is rewarded for completing the 3 street races. Each race will be hosted by either Milhouse, Nelson, or Ralph. The dev team really loved Ralph. You can usually find him wandering around Springfield in addition to being able to find him for the races. Some of these races can be a bit tough if you challenge them with a car from the respective levels. You can come back to these races later if you want to try and knock them out with cars from later levels, but if you take them on right away, they can get pretty tricky. The lead racer is typically the character you will play as in the next level, the exception to this being level 7, so their stats will be a bit of a step up in most cases. In that rant about the vehicles, I mentioned the bonus missions and the street races. Those were the other things left for the completion of the game, other than the main story missions. Road Rage didn't go into a full story, all it really did was set up the premise. Hit and Run, on the other hand, goes a little further in the direction of making an actual narrative for the game to follow. To put it simple, this game is essentially a longer Treehouse of Horror segment. But if you want a longer version of the description, spoilers, I guess, strange drones start showing up in Springfield. Homer gets roped in thinking it's Burns. Bart gets abducted by aliens. Lisa looks for more signs for her missing brother. Lisa finds Bart, but he's out of whack. Marge looks deeper into what's going on to help Bart. Turns out it's something to do with the soda Buzz Cola. So Apu looks deeper into where it's actually coming from because he's selling the product in his store. Apu and Bart find out it's aliens. I guess Bart forgot that part. They are filming humans doing stupid stuff for their space TV show. To up their game, Kang and Kodos put their brainwashing cola in the water supply and start distributing laser guns. Bart goes to Krusty to help spread the word about the aliens. Homer helps Bart because the aliens are using the brewery as their base, and they find out that cola will rise the dead. Now zombies are taking over Springfield. Homer sacrifices Grandpa for the greater good and becomes famous. There's not really anything to dissect here, it's just a story to move things along. Unless you take the story bits of cola bad to be a life lesson. So if you're really looking into it, there really isn't much of a story. But again, it's not super necessary. There's easily the chance that this could have ended up like the Simpsons game, with a weird and ultimately pretty dumb story. And given when the game was made, it was already around the tipping point for the series where a lot of fans were growing tired of the Simpsons. And the writing started to focus on guest appearance and nonsensical gags rather than satirical, more story-driven episodes. I've heard rumors that there was actually a cut guest star that was supposed to get their own vehicle in Hit and Run, but with how popular the game has become, I'm not too sure on my readings. You could argue Hit and Run is more in line with the more formulaic bits and storytelling of the seasons of the show that were airing at the time, but the references feel a bit more like a showcase rather than a cheap callback, and you could argue that the cola brainwashing stuff is closer to the more satirical stuff rather than the absurd bits, since it's tied to the Treehouse of Horror theme, which has always gotten a bit absurd.
Cola. Must get Buzz Cola.
You could probably categorize all of the different missions into categories. That gets a bit messy in the later game. A lot of the missions are a single objective: collect thing, race guys, destroy vehicles. But later into the game, you'll get missions with more layers or more objectives after completing something. The further into the game you get, the more intense these can get. And like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of factors that can make the game really hard. But in a bit of a saving grace, these controls are actually really good. Driving feels tight and smooth, and it's easy to make more complex decisions while driving than it otherwise typically would have been in a racer. Handling and speed control is more the name of the game when it comes to more in-depth racing games, but with a game like Hit and Run, making sure things feel responsive as well as fast is really important to getting all of the different mission types to work super well. If I'm going to smash into cars on purpose, I need to be able to turn really sharp but not lose control. That's really the important thing with Hit and Run's controls. These still feel like cars, and all of the different cars feel different, but they also work really well for the game. Of course, like I just mentioned, there are different vehicles with different stats that may control like you're driving on butter, but that's the fun in vehicle variety. Most of these vehicles don't feel the same, but the overall controls are really smooth. One of my favorite things to do in this game is whip my car back around after spinning out. I feel like there aren't many games that let you do something like this. The success of doing this is more dependent on the vehicle you're driving, but it's something you can do with most cars. These good controls aren't exclusive to driving though. Most of the focus will be there, as most of the missions will have you driving, but the on-foot levels are still good too. I sometimes wish there was a bit more of these, but in reality, with the more tight exploration areas, they sort of check the box there. The characters all move around the same, so there isn't really a difference between the characters. The difference is just with the cars. But the on-foot movement is pretty snappy. You lose a bit of that snappiness when running, but that's to be expected. The on-foot levels are a bit more limited, as they're just about collecting something. Just run into the glowing object and you're good. There's also some limited platforming that can be a little annoying sometimes, but that's more reserved to the exploration areas, or the climb to Mr. Burns in level 7. On foot, there really isn't any combat. The wasp cameras will shoot at you, but if they hit you, they just make you drop your coins. And cops will still charge at you in their cars, so I don't advise going on foot unless if you're making a break for a building. The only thing you can do to fight is kick, and this is just to break boxes and wasps. Or kick people if you want. With these controls in mind, there aren't really any bad missions in Hit and Run, and that's a pretty huge thing to accomplish. Sure, there are some rather basic missions in the first 3 levels of the game, and then the last 4 missions of the game are pretty much all the same thing. And they're all hard, but not outright bad. It's that difficulty that might be the only thing that I would even consider making these things even remotely lean towards being outright bad. There's some really unfair stuff going on in those last couple of missions I just mentioned. Plus there's this damn jump where if you don't aim perfectly off of the jump, you'll likely crash into a wall and drop the item you're carrying. You can reset your car just before landing if needed, so that genuinely fixes a lot of the issue there. But in other missions like Set to Kill, the time limit can be really tight. There is of course a bit of a workaround to this level as well, by picking up one of the items a little later so the timer resets as you're already on your way back to Krusty Lou Studios. But the closest I get to calling a mission bad is with level 5's Quick Cache. It just feels designed poorly. You're forced to drive Snake's Bandit, a fast car, but it's not very good for destroying armored trucks, which is the goal. You'll be destroying your own vehicle much more than you are the armored truck. Thankfully, there is no time limit to this, as you will need to leave the armored truck at times to go pick up a wrench to fix up your car. So then you can continue to drive into the truck. If there was a time limit, assuming it didn't give you an absurd amount of time, I'm sure this level would be the sore spot of the game. But as it is, it's more tedious than anything else. Level 5 is a bit of an oddity in general. It's the only level in the game where you don't play as a member of the actual Simpsons family, and it feels a bit like they're retreading a lot of the narrative ground that Marge covered in her missions. It does give us another chance to take a crack at downtown Springfield. With the faster cars found later in the game, a lot of the different areas like the highways feel a bit more natural, but the actual locations in the level aren't used a whole lot. Both the hospital and DMV are used thematically, but they aren't really that important as the locations were in level 2, with Bart visiting all the different locations like Moe's or the police station, and then the stadium is frequently visited while talking with Frank. The hospital does give us one of my favorite missions in the game. 8 is Too Much has Apu stealing diapers from the Shelbyville 9 for his octuplets. I find the concept of this level hilarious. Apu driving the Homer into a car packed with 9 babies until diapers spill out like a piñata. Plus, it's one of the rare moments we actually get to see Dr. Hibbert, which is a nice bonus for us Julius Hibbert fans. Apu being the playable character for an entire level is probably the part that stands out the most. There's some obvious controversy around the character, but Apu was a rather popular character for the series around this time, so it doesn't really surprise me he's playable. His level has some jokes that haven't really aged well, and the fact that the character isn't even in the show as a background element is likely why this game will never get a direct remake or remaster like the fans clamor for. The missions probably could be rewritten for a character like Lisa, if there was a remake of the game. With her being all eco-friendly, her motivation for the cola source would fit, and even the baby stuff could be seen as her trying to help the hospital. But that would have the levels go from Homer, Bart, Lisa, Marge, Apu, Bart, Homer, to Homer, Bart, Lisa, Marge, Lisa, Bart, Homer. This would mean Marge would be the only one without 2 levels. I think this is the main reason Apu was even given his own level. It does offer some more diversity. Homer and Bart getting 2 levels makes sense. They're by far the most popular characters in The Simpsons. And then having Apu added in changes things up, makes things less formulaic. The only other level I really want to talk about in depth for its oddities is level 7. Level 7 uses the suburbs again, ending the game where it started. This level has you play as Homer again, but the entire look has changed. Levels 4, 5, and 6 were primarily time of day changes, with a few things changed up in the levels. Level 7 not only changes the visual theming quite a bit, but it also changes up the paths a lot, and to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of some of these changes. The overall theme of the level is great, and is a nice little nod to The Simpsons' deep ties to Halloween. If you look at the newspaper on the loading screen, you'll actually see that the level takes place on Halloween. All of the stock cars on the street are Halloween themed as well. And there's even some more fun ones like the ghost boat or the broomstick. And then all of the NPCs are either zombies or kids in costumes. So far this all sounds fun, right? And for the most part, all of this stuff is really cool. There's one thing that really bothers me about this level. It's the fact that the level doesn't create a loop. You don't have access to anywhere in the rich area, to the interior of the power plant. The power plant's parking lot is pretty important to the area, as you'll come here several times to pick up toxic waste. But there's a whole segment of the level that's completely removed. This isn't the worst thing, as the biggest things that were missing were areas like Burns' Manor and the interior to the plant. But not having the track connect to itself feels like the level's incomplete. If there was stuff over there, they could have spiced things up in those repetitive last 4 missions, and let you go the opposite way for 1 or 2 of those. This is something I would very much like to see in a remake. Now, with all the talk of a remaster or remake, I don't think that it's necessary. There are plenty of games from this era that I'd argue deserve a remaster, but Hit and Run is such a remnant of its time. I for both gaming and The Simpsons. It really was the end of an era for the show, and the game acted as this nice cap to that. It was almost like a museum for the show's history up to that point. A straight-up re-release wouldn't hurt, just a quick $15 port with some touch-ups to the game so it's adapted to newer controllers, and maybe make it a little less buggy, but Donut Team has that covered for PC, so I doubt there's much interest from the actual licensing owners. Not to mention all the life the community still breathes into this game through the PC version. So back to those original questions. Why do I and so many others love this game? For me, it's a mix of being a fan of The Simpsons, liking driving games, and having played this while growing up. But I'm one case. There's no way it's the same for everyone. But having played the game and having watched so many other people play the game, I think I've picked up on some things that might sort of answer the question. The obvious one being when the game came out and what it was taking inspiration from. GTA 3 was big, and there wasn't a great substitute for people who either were too young or weren't a fan of the more mature and violent nature of GTA. So here's The Simpsons. A series, while a bit more mature, with the occasional swear or offensive joke, is really popular with families everywhere. So that combination of brand recognition and it being a game that younger players could experience opposed to the GTA games probably helped it a lot there. But from an actual gameplay front, I think that difficulty is what really got people to latch onto this game. Why would a game that can get really hard be bringing in a lot of attention? Well, it's something with that difficulty I actually haven't mentioned yet. That being that you can skip levels if you fail too many times. Meaning, if a mission is too tough for someone, they can skip it and move along. So aside from the few times the game actually forces you to complete a level to progress, which I believe is only in level 7, you are never held back by anything else. You are welcome to explore all 7 levels and attempt any of the missions. But it gets better. For those who can beat all of the missions without much of a struggle, the game can end up being a bit short, which also means it's great for replaying. The game can be beaten in under 2 hours by speedrunners. It sort of loops back to how I was saying the driving felt really good. The gameplay has this really good loop, and the actual controls feel really good. In short, the game is really good. There's likely some other stuff that people really liked about the game, like its variety of cheat codes, or maybe how well the music fits the game. But overall, I really think the game is just a really good package. In a way, this sort of feels like a Sonic Mania type of situation. A game made by a bunch of fans, for fans. It's pretty clear that the developers really loved The Simpsons. Whether it was how well they blended in all the references or how much they used Ralph, there was love put into every corner of this game. It's by no means a perfect game. I primarily gushed about the game, but it has its flaws. There are certain areas of the map where you can just see the world kind of end. The characters do not shut up, so you'll hear a lot of the same lines being said, and it's not super original in its writing. But these are all little things in the grand scheme of things, but that's really why I'm not surprised to see others clamoring for more of this. It was done pretty damn well. Now, to be completely clear, I know this game is no masterpiece. There are the issues I just mentioned, but the missions can be a bit repetitive. And I know there's a fair amount of people who aren't a fan of the on-foot controls, or there are even those who just don't like The Simpsons. All of these are fair and legitimate complaints. But it's the sort of game that'll get people like me who like it beyond those sort of issues. Of course, nostalgia is a part of that, and I'm certainly one of those people affected by it. But again, the foundation the game is based on is really good. Would I say the game is overrated? No, but I certainly think that people asking for the remake blow that side of things out of proportion a bit. If there was a sequel that built off the original, I think that would be a different story. I really think different areas of Springfield, different playable characters, or a more fleshed out narrative could have really worked. But now, too much time has passed. The Simpsons TV show is bouncing back a little bit, and is nowhere near the bottom that it was stuck at for a couple of years. But it still isn't the same, and it probably won't ever be. But Hit and Run was a great representation of how beloved The Simpsons was in its earlier seasons. And thanks to Donut Team, the PC version of the game is still playable today. And if you have the old consoles and a TV that supports them, those hold up really well too. In the end, it stands out as one of the best licensed games of its era. So if you're a fan of The Simpsons or just want to mess around in a quirky sandbox, this game is absolutely worth a try. In the end, it stands as one of the best licensed games of its era, and one that's sure to be remembered for years to come.